The pitchfork clattered from Henry Walsh's hands when he stepped out of his cabin at first light and saw the massive orc woman standing perfectly still at the edge of his property, her green skin luminous in the pale dawn, her eyes never leaving the tree line where the wolves had howled all night long. Henry's heart hammered against his ribs as he took in the sight of her. She stood nearly 6.5 feet tall, broad-shouldered and powerfully built, with thick dark hair pulled back in a warrior's braid. Her tusks curved upward from her lower jaw, small but unmistakable, and her pointed ears twitched at every sound from the surrounding forest. She wore battered leather armor that had seen better days, and a notched sword hung at her hip. Most striking of all were her eyes, a pale amber color that seemed to glow in the half-light, and they were fixed with unwavering intensity on the darkness between the trees. "You," Henry said, his voice rough from sleep and shock. "You're still here." The orc woman's gaze flickered toward him for just a moment before returning to her vigil. "The wolves did not come because I stood here," she said simply. Her voice was deeper than a human woman's, with a slight growl underlying each word. "They will not take you while I watch." Henry's mind spun back to the previous evening, when this same orc had stumbled onto his property just before sunset. He had been mending the fence around his chicken coop when he heard the crash of something large moving through the underbrush. His first instinct had been to run for his hunting rifle, but then he saw her emerge from the trees, one hand pressed to her side where blood seeped between her fingers. She had collapsed near his well, and despite every warning his father had drilled into him about orcs being dangerous savages who would kill a human as soon as look at them, Henry had found himself unable to leave her there to bleed out. He had brought her water, clean cloth for bandages. She had been suspicious at first, her hand never leaving her sword hilt, but she had accepted his help. The wound in her side was deep, clearly from a blade rather than an animal. When he had asked what happened, she had simply said, "I chose kindness over cruelty, and my clan chose to punish me for it." Henry had offered her his barn for the night, a safe place to rest while she healed. She had accepted with a curt nod, but apparently she had not stayed there. Instead, she had spent the entire night standing guard while he slept, unaware that danger circled his home. "You should have rested," Henry said, moving closer but keeping a respectful distance. "That wound needs time to heal." "Your kindness bought my protection," she replied. "I do not leave debts unpaid. It wasn't a trade. I just couldn't leave you bleeding." For the first time, she turned to look at him fully, and Henry saw something shift in her expression, confusion perhaps, or maybe disbelief. "You are strange for a human," she said. "I've been told I'm strange for a lot of reasons." Henry managed a slight smile despite his nerves. "I'm Henry Walsh. This is my farm, such as it is." The orc woman studied him for a long moment. "I am Grokha," she said finally. "Formerly of the Stonefist clan, now belonging to no one." "Well, Grokha, formerly of the Stonefist clan, would you like some breakfast? Proper food might help you heal faster than standing in the cold all night." Grokha's stomach chose that moment to growl audibly, and Henry could have sworn he saw the faintest hint of embarrassment cross her face. "I would accept food," she said with as much dignity as she could muster. Henry led her toward the cabin, acutely aware of how she moved with practiced wariness, her eyes constantly scanning for threats. She was a warrior through and through, that much was obvious. When they reached the door, she hesitated. "I am too large for human dwellings," she said, "the doorframe's tall enough. I built this place myself, and I planned for high ceilings, always wanted the space to breathe." Henry pushed the door open and gestured inside. "Please." Grokha had to duck slightly, but she made it through without incident. Inside, the cabin was simple but well maintained. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, A rough-hewn table and chairs sat near the window, and a bed frame with a corn husk mattress occupied the far corner. Herbs hung drying from the rafters, and shelves held jars of preserved vegetables and smoked meats. "Sit," Henry said, pointing to the sturdiest chair. "I'll get the fire going and make us something hot." He worked quickly, building up the fire and setting a pot of water to boil. He sliced thick pieces of bread from yesterday's loaf and added strips of salted pork to a pan. Grokha watched him with an intensity that made the back of his neck prickle, but he forced himself to move naturally, to treat this like any other morning, despite the fact that he was cooking for an orc warrior who could probably snap him in half if she wanted to. "Why did your clan cast you out?" Henry asked as he worked. "You said something about choosing kindness." Grokha was silent for so long that Henry thought she might not answer. Then she spoke, her voice carefully controlled. "We raided a human settlement 3 days' journey north of here. My clan chief wanted to take slaves, children mostly, to sell to the dark traders who come from across the sea. I refused to let him take a human girl, maybe 8 summers old. She reminded me of my sister at that age." Henry's hand stilled on the pan. "You protected a human child." "I killed 2 of my own clan brothers to do it," Grokha said flatly. "The chief declared me traitor and outcast. He would have killed me, but I am the best fighter the Stonefist clan has ever produced. I escaped, but not before they gave me this." She touched her wounded side. "The girl, did she get away? I sent her running toward the river. I do not know if she made it home." For the first time, Grokha's voice held something other than steel. There was sorrow there and doubt. Henry turned from the stove and met her eyes. "You saved her life. Whatever happened after, you gave her a chance she would not have had. That took real courage." Grokha's expression hardened. "It took stupidity. Now I have no clan, no home, no purpose. I wander alone until some bounty hunter kills me or I starve in the wilderness. That is the price of my courage." "Or," Henry said carefully, "you could stay here for a while, at least until you heal properly. I could use the help, honestly. Winter's coming and there's a lot of work to be done before the first snow. I've got a spare room in the barn that's weather-tight and food enough for 2 if we're careful." Grokha stared at him as though he had sprouted a second head. "You would let an orc live on your land? Share your food? You spent all night protecting me from wolves when you could barely stand. I'd say that makes you better company than most humans I've met." Henry turned back to the stove and flipped the pork. "Besides, I've been alone out here for 2 years. Conversation might be nice. Humans and orcs do not live together. It is forbidden." "Forbidden by who?" "We're out on the frontier. Nearest town is a 3-hour ride. Nobody comes out here except the occasional trader, and they're usually too drunk to notice much of anything." Henry slid the cooked food onto 2 wooden plates and brought them to the table. "Stay or go, it's your choice, but the offer stands." Grokha looked down at the plate of food, then back up at Henry. Her amber eyes searched his face as though trying to find the trap, the hidden cruelty. But Henry simply sat down and began eating his own breakfast, acting as though sharing a meal with an orc warrior was the most normal thing in the world. Finally, Grokha picked up a piece of bread and bit into it. Her eyes widened slightly. "This is good bread," she said, sounding almost accusatory. "Thank you. I learned to bake when I was stationed at the fort. Army food was terrible, so a few of us figured out how to make our own." "You were a soldier, 5 years in the border guard, saw enough fighting to last a lifetime." Henry chewed thoughtfully. "That's why I came out here, actually. Wanted somewhere quiet where I could work with my hands and not have to kill anyone." Grokha consumed her food with the efficiency of someone who had gone hungry too often. When she finished, she sat back in the chair, which creaked under her weight, and regarded Henry with something approaching respect. You fight well enough to survive 5 years as a border guard, yet you choose to be a farmer. I choose to be alive and sane, Henry corrected. War eats men from the inside out. I wanted to grow things instead of destroying them. He stood and collected the empty plates. So, what do you say? Want to help me reinforce the chicken coop today? The wolves have been getting bold. You truly mean this offer? I truly do. Grokha rose to her feet, towering over Henry even though he was not a small man himself at just over 6 feet tall. She placed one large hand over her heart in what he recognized as an orc gesture of oath-taking. Then, I will stay until the first snow falls. I will work for my food and shelter, and I will protect this place as if it were my own. This I swear. Henry felt something shift in the air between them, a sense of significance he did not entirely understand. All right then, he said. Let me find you some clothes that aren't full of blood and holes, and then we'll get to work. The morning passed in surprisingly comfortable silence as they worked together on the chicken coop. Grokha's strength made quick work of tasks that would have taken Henry hours alone. She could lift fence posts as though they weighed nothing and drive them into the hard ground with just a few powerful strikes. Her wound clearly pained her, though she never complained or even acknowledged the discomfort. Henry found himself impressed by her stoicism. Around midday, they took a break near the well. Henry drew up fresh water and offered the ladle to Grokha first. She drank deeply, water running down her chin and neck. When she finished, she wiped her mouth with the back of her hand and looked out over Henry's modest farm. You have built something good here, she said. The land is healthy. The animals are well cared for. This required dedication. It's not much, but it's mine. Henry drank his own share of water and splashed some on his face. The autumn sun was warm despite the crisp air. When I first got this land, it was completely wild. Took me 6 months just to clear enough ground for a cabin and a garden. Another year to get the barn up and the fields ready for planting. You did this alone, mostly. Had some help from a trader named Samuel who comes through every few months. He's a good man, doesn't ask too many questions. Henry hesitated, then added, He's the one who told me that the local orc clans sometimes raid the outlying farms. Said I should keep my rifle loaded and my doors barred at night. Grokha's expression darkened. He was not wrong. The clans see humans as enemies or resources, nothing more. They would burn this place and take everything of value. But you're not like that. I am exactly like that, Grokha said harshly. I have raided. I have killed. I have taken what was not mine because my chief commanded it and because I believed humans deserved no better. Do not make the mistake of thinking me noble, Henry Walsh. I am a warrior and a killer, and the only reason I am here instead of burning your home is because I finally saw too much, and my conscience broke through the hate. Henry absorbed this quietly. What changed? He asked. What made you finally see? Grokha was silent for a long time, staring at the distant tree line. The girl, she said finally. She looked at me with such terror, but also with hope. As though despite everything, despite what she had been taught about orcs being monsters, she believed I might help her. And I realized that I had become exactly what humans feared. A monster without mercy or honor. My sister would have been ashamed of me. Your sister? She died when I was young, 15 summers. A human hunting party killed her while she gathered herbs near the border. They said later they thought she was a deer. Grokha's hands clenched into fists. That is what I was taught, that humans are careless, cruel, that they kill without thought or remorse, and so I became the same, calling it justice. I'm sorry, Henry said quietly. That's a terrible thing to carry. It does not excuse what I have done. No, Henry agreed, but it explains it. And the fact that you stopped, that you chose differently even when it cost you everything, that means something. That means you can change, that you already have changed. Grokha looked at him with something like wonder in her amber eyes. How can you be so calm about this? I just told you I have killed humans, burned human homes. I could have killed people you knew. You could have, Henry said, but you didn't kill me when you had the chance. You protected me instead. I figure that's worth something. He stood and stretched his back. Come on, we've still got a lot of work to do before sunset. Those fence posts won't set themselves. They worked through the afternoon, falling into an easy rhythm. Henry found himself explaining the work as they went, pointing out the best way to angle a post for stability or how to weave the wire tight enough to keep predators out. Grokha listened intently and asked surprisingly thoughtful questions. She learned quickly, adapting her considerable strength to the more delicate work of farming with an attention to detail that impressed him. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, they finished securing the last section of fence. Henry stepped back to admire their work, satisfaction warming his chest. That should hold, he said. Even if a wolf tries to dig under, the wire goes deep enough to stop them. It is good work, Grokha agreed. She was leaning against a post, and Henry noticed the way she kept her hand pressed to her injured side. Let me check that wound before we have dinner, he said. You've been pushing yourself hard all day. Grokha looked like she wanted to argue, but instead she just nodded. They walked back to the cabin together, the first stars beginning to appear overhead. Inside, Henry lit several candles and gestured for Grokha to sit. She removed the borrowed shirt he had given her, revealing the bandage wrapped around her torso. Blood had seeped through in places. This needs to be changed, Henry said, fetching clean cloth and his jar of healing salve. His mother had taught him the recipe years ago, a mixture of comfrey, calendula, and honey that worked wonders on wounds. This is going to sting. I have endured worse, Grokha said, but he saw her jaw tighten as he carefully unwrapped the old bandage. The wound was deep but clean, a long slash that ran from just below her ribs to her hip. Someone had been trying to gut her, Henry realized with a cold flash of anger. Her own clan had tried to kill her in one of the cruelest ways possible. You're lucky this didn't get infected, he said, applying the salve with gentle fingers. Grokha's skin was warm under his touch, her muscles like iron beneath the surface. He tried not to think about how aware he was of her physical presence, the way her breath hitched slightly when the salve touched the wound. Orcs heal quickly, Grokha said through gritted teeth. It is one of our few advantages. Still, you need to take it easy for a few more days. No lifting anything heavier than a feed bucket. Henry began wrapping fresh bandages around her torso, working carefully to keep the pressure even without making it too tight. I mean it, Grokha. You tear this open again and it might not heal right. You sound like a mother hen, Grokha said, but there was no real annoyance in her voice. If anything, she sounded almost amused. Someone has to look after you since you clearly won't do it yourself. Henry tied off the bandage and stepped back. There, that should hold. Grokha pulled the shirt back on, moving more carefully now. Thank you, she said quietly. I am not accustomed to being tended to. Well, get accustomed. You're staying here until winter, and I'm not going to let you work yourself to death in the meantime. Henry moved to the stove and began preparing dinner, cutting vegetables and chunks of preserved meat into a pot for stew. Tell me about orc culture. What was it like growing up in the clan? Grokha seemed surprised by the question, but after a moment she began to speak. She told him about the Stonefist clan's traditions, how children were trained to fight from the time they could walk. She described the harsh beauty of the mountain caves where they made their home, the complex system of honor and challenge that governed their society. She spoke of her mother, a fierce warrior who had died in battle when Grokha was 12, and her father, who had never recovered from the loss and eventually walked into the wilderness to die alone. Henry listened intently, asking questions and genuinely trying to understand this world so different from his own. As the stew bubbled over the fire and the cabin filled with warmth and good smells, he found himself fascinated by Grokha's stories. She was more than just a warrior. She was intelligent, thoughtful, and beneath her hard exterior, there was a deep well of emotion she kept carefully controlled. "What about you?" Grokha asked eventually. "You know my story now, tell me yours." So Henry told her about growing up on a small farm much like this one, the youngest of 3 sons. He talked about joining the army to escape the boredom of rural life, only to discover that war was far worse than boredom could ever be. He described the things he had seen on the border, the skirmishes with raiding parties both orc and human, the casual cruelty he had witnessed from his own commanding officers. "There was this one captain," Henry said, stirring the stew absently. "He used to collect trophies from the orcs we killed. Tusks, mostly. Said they made good decorations. I hated that man more than I hated the enemy. At least the orcs we fought were defending their territory or following their chiefs. He was just cruel because he could be." "What happened to him?" Grokha asked. "He led a patrol into an ambush. Half the men died, including him. The rest of us barely made it back." Henry ladled stew into 2 bowls. "After that, I knew I had to leave. I had saved up my pay, and when my term of service ended, I bought this land and never looked back." They ate together in comfortable silence, the stew warming them from the inside out. Outside, the night sounds of the forest filtered through the walls. Owls calling, small animals rustling in the underbrush, the distant howl of a wolf. Inside the cabin, it felt safe and almost peaceful. "I will take first watch tonight," Grokha said as she finished her meal. "You need to rest," Henry protested. "And you need to sleep. I am a warrior, Henry Walsh. Standing guard is natural to me. Let me do this." Grokha's tone brooked no argument. "You kept watch over me when I was wounded. Allow me to return the favor." Henry wanted to argue further, but he could see the determination in her eyes. "All right," he conceded. "But wake me in a few hours and we'll trade off." "Deal, deal," Grokha agreed. Henry showed her where he kept his rifle and ammunition, though Grokha seemed more comfortable with her own sword. He banked the fire and climbed into his bed, suddenly aware of how exhausted he was. The mattress felt like heaven after the long day of hard work. "Grokha," he said into the darkness. "Yes, I'm glad you're here." There was a pause, then her voice came back, softer than before. "I am glad to be here as well, Henry Walsh. Sleep well." Henry closed his eyes, and despite the strangeness of having an orc warrior standing guard in his cabin, he fell asleep almost immediately. The days that followed developed into a pattern that felt surprisingly natural. Henry and Grokha would rise at dawn, share breakfast, and then divide the day's work between them. Grokha's strength and endurance made tasks that had once taken Henry days to complete pass in mere hours. They reinforced the barn against the coming winter, chopped and stacked several cords of firewood, and harvested the last of the garden vegetables before the first frost could claim them. As they worked, they talked. Grokha told him more about orc traditions, and Henry found himself fascinated by the complexity of her culture. It was not the savage, mindless violence he had been taught to expect. There was structure, honor, and yes, brutality, but also art, music, and deep bonds of loyalty. "We are not so different from humans," Grokha said one afternoon as they worked together to dig a root cellar. "We love, we grieve, we hope for the future, but we have been at war for so long that we have forgotten how to be anything other than enemies." Maybe that can change, Henry said, hauling another bucket of dirt up from the hole. One person at a time. Grokha paused in her digging and looked up at him, dirt smudged across her green cheek. You truly believe that? I'm standing here digging a root cellar with an orc who saved my life, and I trust you more than most of the humans I've known. So yeah, I believe it. Something shifted in Grokha's expression, a softening around her eyes. You are a strange man, Henry Walsh, but perhaps that is not a bad thing. As the days turned into weeks, Henry found himself growing more and more aware of Grokha as something other than just a helpful companion. He noticed the way she moved with unconscious grace despite her size, the rare smile that would cross her face when she accomplished something particularly well. He found himself looking forward to their evening meals together, to the conversations that would stretch late into the night as they sat by the fire. One evening, about 3 weeks after Grokha's arrival, Samuel the trader came by with his wagon full of goods. Henry saw the man's eyes widen as he took in the sight of Grokha standing near the barn, but to his credit, Samuel did not reach for his weapon. "Henry," Samuel called out carefully. "You all right there?" "I'm fine, Samuel. This is Grokha. She's been helping me get ready for winter." Henry walked over to meet the trader, aware of Grokha hanging back but watching carefully. "Grokha, this is Samuel Hughes. He's a good man and the only trader I trust." Samuel was in his 50s, weathered and sharp-eyed from years on the road. He looked between Henry and Grokha several times before slowly climbing down from his wagon. "Never thought I'd see the day," he muttered. "An orc and a human working together peaceable-like." "There's a first time for everything," Henry said easily. "What have you got for trade this time?" Samuel showed them his wares: salt, sugar, lamp oil, and various tools and dry goods. Henry traded some of his preserved vegetables and a few chickens for the supplies he would need to get through winter. All the while, Samuel kept stealing glances at Grokha, who stood silent and watchful. Finally, as Samuel was preparing to leave, he pulled Henry aside. "Boy, do you know what you're doing?" he asked in a low voice. "That's an orc. They're dangerous." "So am I if I need to be," Henry replied calmly. "Grokha saved my life, Samuel. She's been nothing but helpful and honorable since she got here. I trust her." Samuel shook his head slowly. "Your funeral, I suppose, but if you need help, you know where to find me." He climbed back onto his wagon and gathered the reins. Before he left, he called out to Grokha. "You heard him, orc, and I'll hunt you down myself." Grokha nodded slowly. "I would expect nothing less," she said. "Your loyalty to your friend is commendable." Samuel blinked in surprise, then snapped his reins and headed down the road, shaking his head and muttering to himself. After he left, Grokha turned to Henry. "That could have gone worse," she said. "Samuel's a good judge of character. He'll come around." Henry hauled the new supplies toward the cabin. "Come on, let's get this put away before dark." That night, as they sat by the fire after dinner, Grokha was quieter than usual. Henry noticed her staring into the flames, her expression troubled. "What's wrong?" he asked. "Your friend, the traitor. He fears me. He would kill me to protect you." Grokha's hands clenched and unclenched in her lap. "This is how it will always be. Humans will see me as a threat, a monster. No matter what I do, I cannot change what I am." "You're right that you can't change what you are," Henry said carefully. "But what you are is someone brave enough to stand up for what's right even when it costs you everything. What you are is someone who worked all day to help me get ready for winter, even though you don't owe me anything. What you are is someone I'm proud to call a friend." Grokha looked up at him, her amber eyes reflecting the firelight. "Friend," she repeated softly, as though testing the word. "I have not had a friend in a long time." "Well, you have one now." Henry stood and stretched. "I'm going to turn in. You should too. That root cellar isn't going to finish itself tomorrow." But Grokha stayed by the fire long after Henry had gone to bed, staring into the flames and thinking about friendship and trust, and the strange human who had given her both without asking for anything in return. The first snow came in early November, light flakes that dusted the ground and melted by midday. Henry and Grokha stood outside the cabin and watched it fall, their breath misting in the cold air. "Winter is here," Grokha said quietly. "My oath was to stay until the first snow." Henry's stomach dropped. He had known this was coming, had known that their arrangement had a time limit, but the reality of it hit him harder than he expected. "You're leaving then?" Grokha did not answer right away. She held out one large hand and caught a snowflake in her palm, watching it melt against her warm skin. "I should," she said. "That was our agreement." "But," Henry prompted, hearing the hesitation in her voice, "but I do not want to." Grokha turned to look at him, and for the first time since he had known her, she looked uncertain, almost vulnerable. "I have been happier here, working beside you, than I have been in many years. The thought of leaving, of wandering alone again, it fills me with a sadness I do not fully understand." Henry's heart was beating too fast. "Then stay," he said. "Not because of an oath or because you owe me anything. Stay because you want to. Stay because this is where you want to be." "It is not that simple," Grokha said, but her voice lacked conviction. "Why not? This is the frontier. We make our own rules out here." Henry stepped closer to her, close enough that he had to tilt his head back to meet her eyes. "I don't want you to leave, Grokha. These past weeks have been the best I've had since I came out here. The work is easier, the evenings are warmer, and I sleep better knowing you're watching my back. Stay, please." Grokha's breath caught. "You do not know what you are asking. If others find out you are sheltering an orc, they will come for you. They will burn your farm and call you a traitor to your kind." "Let them try," Henry said fiercely. "This is my land, my home, and I'll be damned if I'm going to let anyone tell me who I can and cannot share it with. You would risk everything for me." "Yes," Henry said without hesitation. "Because you're worth it. Because you're more than just some hired hand or temporary guest. You're important to me, Grokha, you matter." For a long moment, Grokha just stared at him, and Henry could see the war playing out behind her eyes. Fear and hope, longing and doubt, all tangled together. Then, slowly, she placed her hand over her heart in that same gesture of oath-taking she had used weeks ago. "Then I will stay," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Not until spring, not until summer, but for as long as you will have me. This I swear, Henry Walsh." Henry felt a grin spread across his face. "Good," he said. "That's good. I was worried I'd have to finish that root cellar by myself." Grokha laughed, a real laugh that transformed her face and made her look younger, less burdened. "You would have made a mess of it," she said. "The walls would have collapsed within a month." "Probably," Henry agreed cheerfully. "Good thing I've got you here to keep me from making terrible mistakes." They stood together in the falling snow, watching the world turn white around them, and Henry felt a warmth in his chest that had nothing to do with the fire waiting inside the cabin. Winter settled over the farm in earnest, bringing with it bitter cold and deep snows. Henry and Grokha worked together to keep the animals fed and warm, to keep the paths clear, to maintain the seemingly endless list of tasks that winter on a farm demanded. They fell into an even closer partnership, learning to anticipate each other's needs and movements with barely a word exchanged. On the longest nights, when the wind howled outside and the cold tried to seep through every crack in the walls, they would sit close to the fire and talk. Grokha told Henry about the legends of her people, tales of great warriors and tragic love stories, of gods who walked among mortals and the price of ambition. Henry shared what he knew of human history and literature, the poems his mother had taught him, and the songs the soldiers used to sing. One particularly cold night in late December, Henry was teaching Grokha to play chess on a set he had carved himself. She was picking up the game quickly, her tactical mind adapting to the strategic demands. "You would have made a good general," Henry said, watching her maneuver her pieces with careful deliberation. "I was, in a way," Grokha replied, moving her knight to threaten his queen. "I led raiding parties for my clan, 24 warriors under my command, and we never failed a mission." She paused, "until I defied the chief and everything fell apart." "That took a different kind of courage," Henry said, moving his queen to safety. "It's easy to lead when everyone agrees with you. It's much harder to stand alone for what's right." Grokha looked up from the board. "Do you ever regret leaving the army? You were good at it from what you have told me. You could have risen in rank, made something of yourself." "I made something of myself here," Henry said. "Something I'm actually proud of. The army taught me discipline and survival, but this farm taught me peace." He gestured around the warm cabin. "This is worth more to me than any rank or medal." "Even sharing it with an orc?" Grokha asked, and there was something vulnerable in the question. "Especially sharing it with you," Henry said quietly. Their eyes met across the chessboard, and the air between them seemed to thicken with something unspoken. Grokha was the first to look away, returning her attention to the game with perhaps more focus than it required. "Check," she said, moving her bishop. Henry forced himself to concentrate on the board, but his mind kept wandering to the way the firelight played across Grokha's features, the curve of her tusks, the strength in her hands. He was becoming increasingly aware that what he felt for her had grown beyond friendship into something more complicated and terrifying. Christmas came and went quietly. Henry had never been particularly religious, but his mother had always made the day special, so he did his best to honor that. He used some of their precious stores of sugar and dried fruit to make a simple cake, and he gave Grokha a gift he had been working on in secret: a new leather belt with a properly fitted scabbard for her sword. Grokha had stared at the gift for a long moment before accepting it with shaking hands. "I have nothing to give you," she said, sounding distressed. "You've given me plenty," Henry assured her. "Company, help, friendship. That's more than enough." But the next morning, Henry woke to find that Grokha had spent the night carving something. She presented him with a small wooden figure, a remarkably detailed horse that fit in the palm of his hand. The craftsmanship was exquisite. "I did not know orcs could create such fine work," Henry said, genuinely amazed. "We are not all warriors," Grokha said, looking pleased by his reaction. "My sister taught me to carve. She said it was important to create beauty as well as destruction, to remember that our hands could do more than hold weapons." She ducked her head. "It is not much, but it is made with care." "It's perfect," Henry said, closing his fingers gently around the carving. "Thank you, Grokha. I'll treasure it." January brought the worst of the winter storms. For 3 days straight, the snow fell so heavily that they could not see more than a few feet beyond the cabin door. Henry and Grokha were effectively trapped inside together, making quick trips to the barn to tend the animals, and then hurrying back to the warmth of the cabin. Being confined in close quarters for so long should have been uncomfortable, but instead, Henry found himself cherishing the forced intimacy. They cooked together, cleaned together, and spent long hours simply talking or sitting in comfortable silence. Grokha began teaching him some of the orc language, laughing at his terrible pronunciation. Henry taught her to read human script, amazed at how quickly she learned. One evening, as the storm raged outside, Grokha was practicing her letters by copying out one of Henry's books. Henry sat nearby, mending a torn shirt and watching her work. The fire crackled cheerfully, and the cabin felt like a small pocket of warmth and safety in a hostile world. "Can I ask you something?" Henry said suddenly. Grokha looked up from her writing. Of course. Do you ever regret it? Saving that human girl, even though it cost you everything. Grokha set down her pen and thought for a long moment. Sometimes, she admitted. When I was alone and wounded and certain I would die in the wilderness, I regretted it very much. I cursed myself for being weak, for letting sentiment override my duty to my clan. She met his eyes. But then I stumbled onto your farm, and you showed me kindness when you had every reason to kill me or drive me away. And I realized that there are different kinds of strength, different kinds of honor. So no, I do not regret it anymore. That choice led me here, and I am grateful for that. Henry's throat felt tight. I'm grateful too, he said. I don't know what I would do without you now. You would be fine, Grokha said with a slight smile. You managed before I arrived. I survived, Henry corrected. But I wasn't living, not really. I was just going through the motions day after day. You changed that. You made this place feel like a real home instead of just somewhere to hide from the world. Grokha stood and crossed to where Henry sat. She lowered herself to sit beside him, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. You did the same for me, she said quietly. You gave me a purpose again, a reason to wake up each morning that was not just survival. You gave me hope, Henry Walsh, and that is a precious gift. They sat in silence for a while, watching the fire dance. Henry could feel the warmth radiating from Grokha's body, could smell the faint scent of wood smoke and leather that always clung to her. His heart was pounding so hard he was certain she must be able to hear it. Grokha, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I need to tell you something. She turned to look at him, her amber eyes wide and questioning. I care about you, Henry said, forcing the words out before he could lose his nerve. More than I should, probably. More than makes sense, but I can't help it. You're brave and strong and honorable, and being with you makes me happier than I've been in years. And I understand if you don't feel the same way, if this is too strange or too complicated. But I had to tell you because keeping it inside was killing me. Grokha stared at him, her expression unreadable. For a horrible moment, Henry thought he had made a terrible mistake, that he had ruined everything with his confession. Then, slowly, Grokha reached out and took his hand in both of hers. Her hands were huge compared to his, calloused and strong, but her touch was gentle. I thought I was the only one, she said, her voice rough with emotion. I have been fighting these feelings for weeks, telling myself that it was impossible, that you could never see me as anything but a useful tool or perhaps a friend at best. Orcs and humans do not love each other. It is forbidden, unnatural. And yet I cannot stop the way my heart lifts when you smile at me, or the way I want to be close to you, to protect you, to make you happy. Henry turned his hand in her grip so he could lace his fingers through hers. Maybe it's not about what's supposed to happen, he said. Maybe it's about what we choose, and I choose you, Grokha, if you'll have me. Grokha's eyes shone with tears she refused to let fall. I am not easy to love, she warned. I am scarred inside and out. I carry the weight of terrible things I have done. I am too big, too strong, too different from you. You're also loyal and kind, and you make me laugh, Henry countered. You work harder than anyone I've ever met, and you have a good heart even if you try to hide it. And yes, you've done things you regret, but so have I. We both have scars. Maybe that's why we fit together so well. Grokha made a sound halfway between a laugh and a sob. Then, moving carefully as though afraid he might break, she pulled Henry into her arms. He wrapped his own arms around her as best he could, pressing his face against her shoulder. She was warm and solid and real, and holding her felt like coming home. This will not be easy, Grokha murmured into his hair. Others will not understand. They will call you traitor and me worse. They may come for us. Then we'll face them together, Henry said. I'm not afraid, not as long as I have you." They held each other for a long time, listening to the storm rage outside while the fire burned low. When they finally pulled apart, Grokha cupped Henry's face in one large hand, her thumb brushing gently across his cheek. "I never thought I could have this," she said softly. "Love, partnership, a home. I thought those things were lost to me forever." "They're not lost," Henry said, covering her hand with his own. "They're right here. We're right here." Grokha leaned down slowly, giving Henry every opportunity to pull away. When he didn't, when he tilted his face up toward hers instead, she closed the distance between them and kissed him. It was gentle and tentative, both of them learning this new language together. Her tusks made it different from kissing a human woman, but Henry didn't care. This was Grokha, and she was perfect exactly as she was. When they broke apart, both of them were breathing hard. Grokha rested her forehead against Henry's, and he could feel her smiling. "Well," he said, slightly breathless, "that was worth waiting for." Grokha laughed, the sound warm and joyful. Indeed it was. They stayed up late into the night, talking and touching and slowly exploring this new dimension of their relationship. Everything felt new and terrifying and wonderful all at once. When they finally went to their separate beds in the early hours of the morning, Henry lay awake for a long time, his heart full to bursting with happiness and hope. The storm broke the next day, revealing a world transformed by snow. Everything was clean and white and beautiful, sparkling in the winter sun. Henry and Grokha worked together to dig out paths and check on the animals, stealing glances and smiles at each other like teenagers with a secret. Their relationship deepened over the following weeks. They were more openly affectionate now, no longer hiding the small touches and looks of longing. Grokha would rest her hand on Henry's shoulder as she passed by, and he would catch her fingers and squeeze them gently. They sat closer together by the fire in the evenings, and sometimes Henry would wake in the night to find Grokha had moved from the barn to sleep on the floor near his bed, unwilling to be far from him even in sleep. But they were also aware of the complications. One evening in late January, as they prepared dinner together, Henry broached the subject that had been weighing on his mind. "Samuel will be back in the spring," he said, chopping vegetables with more focus than necessary. "When he sees that you're still here, that we're together, word will spread." "I know," Grokha said quietly. She was tending the pot of stew on the stove, stirring slowly. "He will tell others. They will come to investigate. We may face trouble." "I won't hide you," Henry said fiercely. "I won't pretend you're just a hired hand or some temporary guest. If people have a problem with us being together, they can take it up with me directly." Grokha turned to face him fully. "You could lose everything. Your neighbors may refuse to trade with you. The town may declare you outcast. You could be putting yourself in real danger." "I could also die from 1,000 other things on this farm," Henry pointed out. "A bad fall, a sick animal, a hard winter. Life is full of risks. At least this one comes with someone I love by my side." It was the first time either of them had used that word directly. Love. It hung in the air between them, powerful and undeniable. Grokha crossed the space between them in 2 long strides and kissed him hard, pouring everything she felt into the contact. When she pulled back, her eyes were blazing with emotion. "I love you too," she said fiercely. "And I will not let anyone hurt you because of me. If they come, we will face them. Together." "Together," Henry agreed. February passed peacefully, the deep winter slowly beginning to loosen its grip. The days grew incrementally longer, and occasionally, the sun would shine warm enough to melt some of the snow. Henry and Grokha began planning for spring planting, discussing which fields to use and what crops would grow best. One afternoon, while they were in the barn checking on the animals, Grokha suddenly went very still. Henry recognized that posture immediately. She had heard something. "What is it?" he asked quietly. "Riders," Grokha said, her hand moving to her sword. "3, maybe 4, coming fast." Henry's stomach clenched. "Could be Samuel coming early," he said, but he didn't believe it. Samuel always came alone and at a leisurely pace. "Get your rifle," Grokha said, "but do not shoot unless I tell you to. Let me handle this." They moved to the front of the cabin and waited. Soon enough, 4 riders appeared on the road, their horses kicking up dirty snow as they galloped toward the farm. As they got closer, Henry could see they were young men, probably from the nearest town. They were armed with rifles and clubs, and their faces were set with grim determination. The riders pulled up short when they saw Grokha standing in front of the cabin, her hand on her sword. The leader, a broad-shouldered man with a thick beard, pointed his rifle in her direction. "We got reports of an orc terrorizing this farm," he called out. "Step aside, farmer. We'll deal with this monster and be on our way." "Nobody's terrorizing anyone," Henry said, moving to stand beside Grokha. "Grokha is my guest and my friend. You need to leave my property." The bearded man spat into the snow. "Your guest, you're harboring an orc. That's against the law, Walsh." "Against nature, too. These things are monsters, not people." "I am standing right here," Grokha said, her voice cold and controlled. "If you have accusations to make them to my face." One of the other riders, younger and more nervous-looking, shifted in his saddle. "People say you've been here for months. Say you've probably killed Walsh and taken his farm for yourself." "If I had wanted to kill him, he would be dead," Grokha said flatly. "Instead, I have worked beside him, protected his home, and shared his hearth. We have harmed no one. We only wish to be left in peace." "It's not right," the bearded man insisted. "Humans and orcs don't mix. It's sick what you're doing here." Henry felt his temper flare. "What we're doing is none of your business. This is my land and I'll share it with whoever I please. Now turn around and ride back to town before this gets ugly." "Before it gets ugly," the bearded man laughed harshly. "You're threatening us. There's 4 of us and one of you farmer." "You are miscounting," Grokha said softly, and there was something in her voice that made all 4 riders go tense. "You see 1 human and 1 orc. What you should see is 2 warriors who have fought and survived things that would break you." Henry Walsh served 5 years as a border guard. "I led raiding parties through the mountains and never lost a single warrior under my command. We are not helpless farmers for you to bully." To emphasize her point, Grokha drew her sword in one smooth motion. The blade sang as it left the scabbard, and the sound made the horses dance nervously. "You have 3 choices," she continued. 1. You can leave now and tell your friends that you found nothing worth reporting. 2. You can try to force us to leave, and I will defend my home and the man I love with every skill I possess. 3. You can accept that the world is changing, that perhaps orcs and humans need not be eternal enemies, and you can choose to be part of that change rather than clinging to old hatreds. The riders exchanged uncertain glances. Up close, Grokha was even more intimidating than at a distance, and her complete confidence in her ability to handle all 4 of them was evident. Finally, the youngest rider lowered his weapon. "Maybe we were misinformed," he said carefully. "Maybe this is not our business after all." The bearded man glared at him. "You're just going to accept this?" "I'm not getting killed over it," the young man replied. "If Walsh wants to live with an orc, that's his choice. We came to check on him and he's fine. Let's go." 2 of the other riders nodded agreement, already turning their horses. The bearded man looked like he wanted to argue further, but he was outnumbered now. With a final disgusted look, he yanked his horse around and kicked it into a gallop. The others followed, disappearing down the road in a cloud of snow and dirt. Henry let out a breath he had not realized he was holding. That could have been worse, he said. They will be back, Grokha said grimly, sheathing her sword. Perhaps not those four, but others. Word will spread that we are here together. Some will be curious, some will be accepting, but many will be angry. We must be prepared for more confrontations. Henry took her hand and squeezed it. Then we'll prepare. We'll make this place defensible if we have to, but I'm not giving you up, Grokha. Not for anyone. Grokha looked down at their joined hands, then up at his face. You are the most stubborn human I have ever met, she said, but her voice was warm with affection. Good thing you like stubborn, Henry replied. They spent the next few weeks quietly fortifying the farm. Not enough to look like they were preparing for war, but enough that they could defend themselves if necessary. They reinforced the doors and windows, made sure they had adequate supplies laid in, and Grokha began teaching Henry some of the fighting techniques she knew. You are not terrible, she said one afternoon as they sparred with practice staves in the barn. Your army training was solid. You just need to learn to use your size to your advantage. You are quicker than me. Use that. Henry ducked under her swing and tapped her ribs lightly with his staff. Like that. Exactly like that, Grokha said, grinning. Again. They trained regularly, and Henry found himself improving rapidly under Grokha's patient instruction. But more than that, he enjoyed the physical connection, the trust required to spar with someone without truly trying to hurt them. It was another way they learned each other, another language they spoke together. March arrived with the first real signs of spring. The snow began to melt in earnest, revealing the brown earth beneath. Birds returned from the south, filling the air with song. Henry and Grokha began preparing the fields for planting, breaking up the soil and adding the composted manure they had been collecting all winter. One warm afternoon, as they worked side by side in the field, Henry straightened up and wiped sweat from his forehead. I've been thinking, he said. Dangerous occupation, Grokha teased, not looking up from her work. I'm serious. I've been thinking about the future, about what we're building here. Henry set down his shovel and turned to face her fully. I want you to know that this is as much your home as it is mine. I know we haven't talked about it directly, but I'm not planning for you to ever leave. This is our farm now, not just mine. Grokha stopped working and looked at him with wide eyes. Henry, I mean it, he continued. I want to build a life with you. I want to plant crops knowing you'll be here to help me harvest them. I want to fix the roof and mend the fences and raise animals and all of it together. And I know it won't be easy, and I know people will give us trouble, but I don't care. I love you, and I want to spend the rest of my life with you. Grokha was silent for a long moment, and Henry could see her struggling with emotion. When she finally spoke, her voice was thick with tears she refused to shed. In my culture, when a warrior wishes to bond with another, they exchange vows before the clan. They swear to protect each other, to fight side by side, to share all burdens and all joys. She took his hands in hers. I have no clan to witness our vows, but I would make them anyway if you are willing. Henry's heart soared. I'm willing. Tell me what to say. Grokha took a deep breath, then spoke in the orc tongue, her voice formal and resonant. Then she translated. I swear by blood and bone, by fire and steel, that you are my chosen companion. I will stand with you against all enemies. I will share your burdens and your joys. I will fight for you, bleed for you, die for you if necessary. And I will love you until the stars go dark and the world ends. This is my oath, freely given. Henry repeated the words as best he could, stumbling over the harsh orc consonants but speaking with complete sincerity. When he finished, Grokha pulled him into a fierce embrace, lifting him clean off his feet. Now you are mine and I am yours, she said into his hair. In the eyes of my people we are bonded, we are one. I like the sound of that, Henry said, laughing. though maybe you could put me down now before I lose all the blood to my head." Grokha set him down gently, but she kept her arms around him. "I never thought I could be this happy," she said. "When I left my clan, I thought I was walking toward death. Instead, I walked toward you, toward life." "We walk toward each other," Henry corrected, "and we'll keep walking together wherever the road leads." They stood in the field, holding each other as the sun moved across the sky, and Henry felt a certainty settle into his bones. This was right. This was meant to be. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. As spring progressed, more visitors came to the farm. Some were hostile, some were merely curious, but a few surprised Henry by being accepting or even supportive. An older woman who ran a farm 2 hours north stopped by and spoke with Grokha for nearly an hour, asking her advice on defending against predators. A young couple from town came to see the orc and the farmer for themselves and left as friends, charmed by Grokha's dry humor and impressed by the thriving farm. Samuel returned in mid-April, and his reaction was perhaps the most important to Henry. The old trader sat on his wagon and looked between Henry and Grokha for a long time before finally speaking. "So it's like that, is it?" he said. "It's like that," Henry confirmed, not backing down. Samuel sighed and climbed down from the wagon. He walked up to Grokha and extended his hand. "I judged you too quick last time," he said. "That was wrong of me. If Henry trusts you, and if you've been here all winter without causing trouble, then I figure you're all right. I'm sorry for threatening you." Grokha shook his hand carefully, mindful of her strength. "You were protecting your friend. There is no shame in that. Still, I should have given you a fair chance." Samuel turned to Henry. "The town's split on you too. Some folks are angry, saying you're a traitor. Others are taking a wait-and-see approach. And a few, the younger ones mostly, think what you're doing is brave. Romantic, even." "What do you think?" Henry asked. Samuel scratched his beard thoughtfully. "I think you're either the bravest man I know or the most foolish, and I have not figured out which yet. But I also think you look happier than I've ever seen you, and that counts for something. So I'll keep trading with you, and I'll spread the word that anyone who wants to cause you trouble will have to go through me first." Henry felt a lump form in his throat. "Thank you, Samuel. That means a lot." "Do not thank me yet," Samuel said. "There's rough times ahead, mark my words, but you've got friends and that will help." True to Samuel's prediction, the trouble came in late May. A group of 10 men rode up to the farm, led by a town official named Marcus Blake. Blake was a hard man, a former military officer who had made it his mission to maintain proper order in the frontier territories. Henry and Grokha met them in front of the cabin, standing side by side. Henry had his rifle, though he kept it pointed at the ground. Grokha was unarmed except for a knife at her belt, a calculated decision to appear less threatening. "Henry Walsh," Blake said formally. "You are hereby ordered to surrender the orc in your custody and present yourself to the town council to answer charges of harboring an enemy combatant and engaging in unnatural relations." "With all due respect," Henry said calmly, "Grokha is not in my custody. She's my partner and my wife by the laws of her people, and I'm not going anywhere unless you plan to drag me, which I do not recommend." Blake's face reddened. "Wife, you cannot marry an orc. They are not people under the law." "Then your law is wrong," Henry said flatly. "Grokha is more honorable and decent than half the humans I've met. She has harmed no one. She has worked this land beside me and defended it when needed. If you have a problem with that, it's your problem, not ours." One of Blake's men spoke up. "We could just take them both by force." Grokha laughed, a sound devoid of humor. "You could try," she said. "I count 10 of you. I have killed more than that single-handedly in battle, and you would not just be fighting me. Henry is a trained soldier, and this is his land. He knows every inch of it, every place to take cover, every angle to shoot from. You might win eventually, but how many of you are willing to die to enforce a law that should not exist? The men shifted uncomfortably. Nobody wanted to be the first to die over what was essentially a domestic matter. Blake tried a different approach. Think about what you're doing, Walsh. You're throwing away your reputation. You're standing in the community for what? A savage who will probably kill you the moment you let your guard down. I'm building a life with someone I love, Henry replied. Someone who has proven her loyalty and her worth 1,000 times over. If the community cannot accept that, then maybe I do not want to be part of that community. You're a fool, Blake spat. Maybe, Henry agreed, but I'm a happy fool, and that's more than most people can say. Blake looked like he wanted to push the issue, but he could see the determination in both Henry and Grokha's eyes. He could also see that his men were not enthusiastic about starting a fight they might not win. With a disgusted sound, he wheeled his horse around. "This is not over," he warned. "The town will not accept this perversion of nature." "Then the town can stay away from my land," Henry called after him. "We're not bothering anyone. We just want to be left in peace." Blake and his men rode off, and Henry felt his knees go weak with relief. Grokha steadied him with a hand on his shoulder. "That was well done," she said. "You did not back down, but you also did not escalate. You gave them room to leave without losing face." "I learned from the best," Henry said, leaning into her touch. "Do you think they'll come back? Perhaps. But each time they leave without violence, it becomes harder to justify returning. We are winning, Henry, slowly but surely. We are proving that we can exist together without the world ending." Summer arrived in full force, bringing with it long days of hard work in the fields. The crops Henry and Grokha had planted together began to flourish. Corn reached toward the sky, beans climbed their poles, and the vegetable garden exploded with produce. They worked from dawn to dusk, and despite the hard labor, Henry had never been happier. In the evenings, after the work was done, they would sit together and watch the sunset paint the sky in brilliant colors. Sometimes they talked, and sometimes they simply enjoyed the comfortable silence of two people who did not need words to understand each other. One particularly beautiful evening in late June, as they sat on the porch watching fireflies dance over the fields, Grokha spoke suddenly. "I have been thinking about children," she said. Henry turned to look at her in surprise. "Children?" "Orcs and humans cannot produce offspring together," Grokha said matter-of-factly. "Our kinds are too different. But there are many orphans in this world, both orc and human, who need homes and families. I thought perhaps, someday, we might offer a home to a child who had none." Henry felt warmth spread through his chest. "I would like that," he said. "I would like that very much. A child who could grow up seeing that orcs and humans can live together in peace, who could help build bridges between our peoples." "It is a dream," Grokha said softly. "Perhaps an impossible one, but it is a good dream." "Then let's make it real," Henry said, taking her hand. "Maybe not this year or even next year, but someday. Let's build a family, Grokha. Let's show the world that love is stronger than hate." Grokha turned to him, and there were tears on her cheeks, glinting in the fading light. "I love you," she said. "I love you so much it terrifies me sometimes." "I love you too," Henry replied, "and I'm not scared anymore. I used to be afraid of what people would think, of what might happen. But now I realize that I would rather face 1,000 angry mobs than spend one day without you." They kissed as the sun set completely, leaving them in the gentle darkness of a summer night. Around them, the farm hummed with life, crickets singing, frogs croaking in the pond Henry had dug last year, the soft sounds of the animals settling down for the night. It was peaceful and perfect, a sanctuary they had built together against all odds. As the summer progressed, more and more people began to accept Henry and Grokha's relationship. A few brave souls even came to visit, drawn by curiosity or admiration. Henry found himself hosting dinners for neighbors he had barely known, introducing them to Grokha and watching as their preconceptions crumbled in the face of her intelligence, humor, and basic decency. One couple in particular, John and Martha Whitman, became regular visitors. They were struggling farmers themselves, and Grokha's advice on everything from crop rotation to animal husbandry proved invaluable. In return, Martha taught Grokha to sew and shared gossip from the town, helping her feel more connected to the human community. "You're becoming quite the social butterfly," Henry teased Grokha one evening after the Whitmans had left. "I am a warrior who has learned to garden and sew," Grokha replied with mock indignation. "My ancestors would be horrified." "I think they would be proud," Henry said seriously. "You've proven that strength comes in many forms. Fighting is important, but so is building, creating, nurturing. You've mastered both." Grokha pulled him close and kissed the top of his head. "You make me want to be better than I was," she said. "You make me believe I can be more than just a weapon." "You were always more than that," Henry assured her. "You just needed someone to see it." Autumn arrived with its usual fanfare of changing leaves and cooling temperatures. Henry and Grokha harvested their crops together, and the yield was the best Henry had ever achieved. The farm was thriving, a testament to their hard work and partnership. On a crisp October morning, Samuel arrived with his wagon and a broad smile. "Got some news from town," he said as he climbed down. "The council met last week and voted to officially recognize your relationship. You and Grokha are now legally considered married under frontier law." Henry felt his jaw drop. "They did what?" "Seems enough people spoke up in your favor that the council could not ignore it anymore," Samuel explained. "The young folks especially have been pushing for it. They see you two as proof that the old hatreds do not have to continue forever." He pulled out an official-looking document. "This here is your marriage certificate, signed and sealed. Congratulations." Grokha took the document with shaking hands, staring at it as though it might disappear. "This makes it real," she whispered. "In human law as well as orc tradition, we are bonded." "It also means you have legal protections now," Samuel added. "Anyone who tries to harm either of you can be prosecuted. You're not just tolerated anymore. You're accepted, at least officially." Henry whooped with joy and grabbed Grokha around the waist, spinning her around despite the fact that she weighed significantly more than he did. She laughed, a sound of pure happiness, and when he set her down, she kissed him soundly. "We did it," Henry said breathlessly. "We actually did it." "We changed the world," Grokha agreed. "Just a little bit, but still." That evening they celebrated with a special dinner. Henry broke out a bottle of wine he had been saving for a special occasion, and they toasted to their future, to the farm, and to the slow but steady progress they represented. As winter approached once more, Henry and Grokha settled into their life together with a sense of contentment and security they had not felt before. They were no longer outlaws or outcasts. They were pioneers, proving that a better world was possible. One snowy December afternoon, as they sat by the fire working on their various projects, Henry carving a new tool handle and Grokha mending one of his shirts, there was a knock at the door. Henry opened it to find a young woman standing on his porch, holding the hand of a small child. The woman was thin and tired-looking, with the desperate air of someone at the end of her rope. The child, a little girl of perhaps 5 or 6, had green skin and tiny tusks. She was an orc, and she looked half-starved and terrified. "Are you Henry Walsh?" the woman asked. "I am." "And this is my wife, Grokha." The woman's eyes flickered to Grokha with something like hope. I heard about you, about how you're raising a family together, human and orc. Is that true? We're planning to, Grokha said, standing and approaching slowly so as not to frighten the child. What can we do for you? The woman took a shaky breath. This is Mira. Her parents were killed in a raid last month. She's got no family, and nobody in town will take her because she's an orc. I've been caring for her, but I'm leaving for the east and I can't take her with me. I heard you might be willing to give her a home. Henry and Grokha exchanged glances, an entire conversation happening in that single look. Then Grokha knelt down to be at eye level with the little girl. Hello, Mira, she said gently. My name is Grokha. I am an orc like you, and this is Henry. He is a human, but he is a good man. We have a farm here with animals and fields and a warm house. Would you like to stay with us? Mira looked between Grokha and Henry with wide, uncertain eyes. You won't hurt me? She asked in a tiny voice. Never, Grokha said firmly. I swear by blood and bone that we will protect you and care for you as though you were our own daughter. You will be safe here, little one. Mira seemed to consider this. Then, slowly, she let go of the woman's hand and took a tentative step toward Grokha. Grokha remained perfectly still, letting the child come to her on her own terms. When Mira was close enough, she reached out and touched one of Grokha's tusks gently. You look like my mother, Mira whispered. Grokha's eyes filled with tears. Then perhaps I can be your mother now, she said softly. If you will let me. Mira threw her small arms around Grokha's neck and burst into tears. Grokha held her carefully, stroking her hair and murmuring comfort in the orc language. Henry felt his own eyes sting as he watched them. The woman wiped her own tears away. Thank you, she said. Thank you for giving her a chance. Thank you for bringing her to us, Henry said. We'll take good care of her. After the woman left, Henry closed the door and turned to find Grokha still holding Mira, who had cried herself to sleep against the orc woman's shoulder. Grokha looked up at him with an expression of overwhelming emotion. We have a daughter, she said, her voice filled with wonder. We have a daughter, Henry agreed, moving to stand beside them. He reached out and gently brushed Mira's hair back from her face. Our family just got bigger. That night, they made up a bed for Mira near the fireplace, piling it with soft blankets and pillows. When she woke from her nap, they fed her warm soup and bread, and slowly, cautiously, she began to relax around them. She was shy and traumatized, but Henry could see the resilience in her, the spark of life that refused to be extinguished. Over the following days and weeks, Mira began to come out of her shell. She followed Grokha everywhere, watching her work and asking endless questions. Grokha was endlessly patient, teaching Mira about their culture, their language, their traditions. She taught her to be proud of her orc heritage, while also helping her understand that humans could be good and kind. Henry, for his part, delighted in being a father. He carved toys for Mira, taught her to read and write, and told her stories by the fire each night. He showed her how to care for the animals and explained how plants grew. Mira absorbed everything like a sponge, her natural curiosity flowering in the safe, loving environment they provided. One evening in early spring, as they sat together after dinner, Mira looked between Henry and Grokha seriously. Am I really your daughter now? She asked. Forever. Forever, Grokha confirmed. We are your family and you are ours. Nothing will change that. Even though Henry is human and I'm an orc, especially because of that, Henry said. Our family is proof that love is stronger than any difference. You're our daughter, Mira, and we love you completely. Mira smiled, a real smile that transformed her small face. I love you too, she said. Both of you. Henry felt his heart might burst. This was everything he had never known he wanted. A home, a wife who challenged and supported him, a daughter to raise and love. It was messy and complicated and sometimes frightening, but it was real and it was his. As spring turned to summer, the farm prospered more than ever. Mira proved to have a natural talent for working with animals, and she took over much of the care for the chickens and goats. She was growing stronger and more confident by the day, the haunted look in her eyes slowly fading. Word of the family spread throughout the region. Some people disapproved, of course, but many more were inspired. Other mixed families began to emerge from the shadows, emboldened by Henry and Grokha's example. The frontier was changing, slowly evolving from a place of hatred and division to one where different peoples could coexist and even thrive together. One warm summer evening, the three of them sat on the porch watching the sunset. Mira was nestled between Henry and Grokha, chattering about the baby goats that had been born that morning. Henry listened with half an ear, mostly just enjoying the moment, the peace and contentment that suffused everything. Grokha caught his eye over Mira's head and smiled, and Henry smiled back. They had come so far from that dawn morning when he had found her standing guard over his cabin. They had faced prejudice, threats, and doubt, but they had prevailed through sheer stubbornness and the strength of their love. "What are you thinking about?" Grokha asked softly. "I'm thinking about how lucky I am," Henry said. "How I stumbled onto the best thing in my life by complete accident." "It was not an accident," Grokha said. "It was fate. We were meant to find each other to build this life together. I believe that." "So do I," Henry agreed. "So do I." Mira looked up at them. "Tell me the story again," she said. "About how you met," Henry laughed. "You've heard it a dozen times, but I like it," Mira insisted. "Please." Grokha ruffled Mira's hair affectionately. "Very well." "It was a dark night, and I was wounded and alone, fleeing from my clan who had turned against me. I stumbled onto this farm expecting to die, but instead I found a strange human man who offered me water and kindness when he should have killed me." Henry listened to Grokha tell their story, adding his own details and corrections, watching Mira's rapt expression. This was their family history now, the founding myth of something new and precious. And as the sun set over their farm, painting everything in shades of gold and amber, Henry felt a deep certainty settle into his bones. They had built something that would last. A home, a family, a future where orcs and humans could love each other without fear. It was not perfect, and there would always be challenges ahead, but they would face them together as they had faced everything else. Together, they were unstoppable. Together, they were home. The years that followed were filled with joy and hard work in equal measure. The farm continued to prosper, becoming well known throughout the region as a place where anyone was welcome regardless of their race or background. Henry and Grokha took in 2 more children over the years. A human boy named Thomas who had lost his parents to sickness, and another young orc girl named Shara who had been abandoned near the town. Mira grew into a strong, confident young woman who moved easily between human and orc communities, serving as a bridge and translator. She had inherited Grokha's strength and Henry's compassion, and she spoke often of her dream to become a healer, to help both humans and orcs. The frontier itself changed around them. More mixed families emerged, and trade between human settlements and orc clans began to increase. It was not universal acceptance by any means. There were still those on both sides who clung to old hatreds, but progress was being made, one family and one friendship at a time. On a crisp autumn morning, 20 years after Grokha had first stumbled onto his farm, Henry stood with her on the same spot where they had first worked together on the chicken coop. His hair was graying now, and his body carried the aches of years of hard labor, but his heart was full. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked Grokha. "Leaving your clan, choosing this life?" Grokha, who now had silver threads running through her dark hair, looked at him with those same amber eyes that had captured his heart so long ago. "Not for a single moment," she said. "You gave me everything I never knew I needed. Love, family, purpose, peace. I would make the same choice 1,000 times over." "Me too," Henry said, slipping his hand into hers. From the house came the sound of laughter as their children argued good-naturedly over something. Smoke rose from the chimney and the fields stretched out around them, ready for the harvest. Everything they had built together was still here, still thriving, a testament to what was possible when people chose love over hate. "Come on," Grokha said, tugging him toward the house. "Mira is making dinner, and you know how she gets when we are late." Henry followed her, their hands still linked, walking toward the warm light spilling from the windows of their home. The farmer, who had once woken to find an orc standing guard over him, had never imagined his life could become this rich, this full, this beautiful. But here he was, surrounded by love and family, proof that even the most unlikely beginnings could lead to the most wonderful endings. And as they stepped into their home together, greeted by the smiling faces of their children, Henry knew with absolute certainty that every choice, every challenge, every moment of fear and doubt had been worth it. They had found each other against all odds, and they had built a life worth living. That was all anyone could ask for, and more than most people ever achieved. They were blessed, and they knew it, and they gave thanks for it every single day. The sun set over the farm, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, and inside the house, a family sat down to dinner together. Human and orc, bound together by love stronger than any prejudice or hate. They were proof that the world could change, that bridges could be built, that hope could triumph over fear. And they lived happily, knowing they had found something rare and precious. A love that transcended every boundary, a family that defied every expectation, and a home that would endure for generations to come.